Hey guys, and welcome to my Week 9 reactions and thoughts video. This week was interesting, but also, fun, in a way, I think. Starting off, we have Thursday night, Halloween game in New York, or New Jersey, I guess, and Rodgers says he played the worst half of his, career, which is crazy. I thought he didn't play very well, but I guess apparently it was him, which is, really shocking. Maybe it's just a play on words and that he's not trying to throw his teammates under the bus. But overall, I think this game said more about the Texans than it did than the Jets win. Don't get me wrong, I think the Jets played, not even as good as like you'd think they'd be able to play with a team with their talent. But overall, I think that like CJ Stroud struggled 10 of 31, still close to 200 yards. I mean, if you look at him and Rodgers, only difference is that Rodgers has 3 TDs and twice as many completions on about the same number of throws. And I mean, it's not like the Houston rushing game was bad. Don't get me wrong, they didn't gouge the Jets as badly as some other teams have. And I mean, Breece Hall looked good. I had a limited carries. I think that they still need to like lean on the run because it's really going to keep Rodgers healthy. But big win for the Jets. This was like, kind of their season on the line. If they lose this and drop to 7 losses, like you can put a stake in them pretty much. But moving on, we have Bills Dolphins, which was a huge game. I did predict Bills to win this just because every time I've thought that like, oh, the Dolphins, they can do a lot of stuff and score points and be hard to contain offensively, and especially with somewhat I wouldn't say a crazy amount of personnel changes, but with the momentum that they were kind of riding, that Tua is back and it's the second week back. Don't get me wrong, they got into a shootout, obviously, with the Bills. The Bills obviously could have won by more just because they had missed field goals by Bass, but Bass nails it when he needs to. What a beautiful kick, and it's like never in doubt kind of thing, which is, God, it's reassuring, as a Bills fan. But crazy good game for the Bills. The interesting thing about Miami is that their defense still can't really. I mean, they had some stomps, but it's like their defense still is really just underperforming. I feel like there's going to be a huge overhaul for their defense in the offseason. If they even have the same D coordinator, maybe they just need a new D coordinator, but it's been rough. And it's not like they don't have talent on Miami. But yeah, good win by the Bills, obviously solidifying their spot as, the potential, the favorite to win that division. Ravens, Broncos. I never thought I'd say that I would see a pass from Sutton to Bo Nix where he just jumps for it and it's a good catch. And I'm like, what? This dude isn't even one. I mean, you look at the QBs drafted this year. If you told me it was Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams or Spencer Rattler, one of these athletic guys, that I would have believed it. But Bo Nix up against the Ravens defense. But yeah, that's really where the Broncos had problems. Obviously, they could not score besides that and a field goal, and the Ravens just cooking the way that they have. Lamar, crazy high completion against a good defense. Not even having to run it. He ran it 3 times for 4 yards. So it's like, you contain Lamar, which is the first part of the battle, but then he beats you with his arm. Crazy. And I mean, Derrick Henry, sets, I think, the most I'm trying to remember the thing that he joined like AP and LaDainian Tomlinson like at like the top of like some running back stat, but kudos to him. I feel like he could still play for many, many, many years because he's just built, he's different, with his physical. And it's like with the Ravens, they don't have to just rely on him. But yeah, crazy win for Baltimore, really showing up and showing why this could be their division, should they be able to beat the Steelers, which I think that they should be able to because they just have a more talented and balanced team. Looking at Chargers Browns, the Chargers just handling the Browns. I thought Herbert looked very, very good, very immaculate. 2 TDs. Yeah, he was 18 of 27, which isn't the highest, completion percentage. But it's like this is a Cleveland defense that like last week they won obviously against Baltimore, and were really just like, I mean, coming off a huge like kind of momentum swing for their season with Jameis Winston, but Jameis Winston reverting to his old ways. And my other problem is that they weren't running it with Chubb. Don't get me wrong, the Chargers have a decent defense, but they made Winston go one-dimensional, almost like, oh, this dude came in and lit it up. Let's just, have him throw it close to 50 times. It was insane. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing on, the Browns? Like, seriously. But yeah, crazy good win for the Chargers. I think that this should make them feel really good, especially considering it wasn't at home. And, they have 5 out of their 8 games have been away, and they're 3-2 on those games, which is, a good sign for them, seeing as they're more than likely to be a wild card if they make the playoffs. Moving on, we have Panthers Saints. As we know, the Saints head coach got fired after this game. Bryce Young, not playing terrible, playing middle of the pack ball. Derek Carr, coming in and not playing well at all this game. Kamara playing and trying to carry the team on his back, and then they still lose. Kamara, they signed him to an extension, and for good reason. This guy is a dude that he plays hard, and he's a more than solid contributor on this team that has kind of a lack of weapons. And unfortunately, Olave going out early, I don't think, helps. But yeah, props to Carolina, I guess, for playing hard and now have, won 2 games this season, and they're trying to get much needed experience, and they beat a division rival at home, which, you could argue that, oh, nobody had them beating any of their division opponents this year with how bad they've looked and how bad they looked coming into the season. Moving on, we have Bengals Raiders. The Raiders doing, interesting things, having Minshew, and then he gets knocked out, and then Ritter comes in. And Ritter, obviously having been with the Falcons last year, gets traded to the Cardinals, and they try him out. And then they cut him, though, and he goes to the Raiders because of their injuries to quarterbacks, obviously. And he doesn't play terribly. He gets sacked 4 times, but he doesn't throw a pick, and he has an all right, completion percentage. But who knows? With the Raiders, it's like, people are saying they're going to draft a quarterback, but maybe you get a good look at Ritter, and who's to say who their head coach is going to be. But it's kind of one of those limbo things with the Raiders. We won't know until after the year. I think that, you want to explore all possible options. But yeah, Joe Burrow, even though it, wasn't the greatest of games, 5 TDs and a pick. In terms of, I think, like completion percentage, but clearly they didn't need Higgins this game. He was hurt, and they didn't really need a run game, even though they've now traded for They've traded for Khalil Herbert from the Bears, who I think is, a reliable back, that can do some good things. But the Bengals, good win, a win they needed, coming closer to 500. And, hopefully they get hot at this time of year, which is the right time, to get hot if you need a surge and you need a push for the playoffs. For a team that was dormant for essentially 2 months, dormant in the win column. Commanders, Giants. I think the Giants, people keep making fun of Danny Jones, but he's not playing terrible. You look at this guy, and it's like essentially, to me, there's people that are saying that like, oh, he's washed, oh, he doesn't play well and that sort of thing, but it's like, oh, 20 of 20 for 26, sorry. And, 174 yards with 2 TDs, got sacked a couple times, but overall, it's like, these guys met up with Jaden Daniels, and Jaden Daniels and the Commanders just ultimately looked like the team maybe better coached. I don't know. There was some suspect calls that Dable didn't like, and they're the kind of calls I feel like they could have went either way, but otherwise this Giants team performed against, potentially the 1 seed, depending on how, the season or the NFC plays out by the end of the season. But overall, the Commanders just looking like a team that's very, very well coached and dominant. Falcons, Cowboys. I don't think this really proved much about the Falcons. I think the Falcons, obviously playing against playing against a team like Dallas, who doesn't have Micah Parsons. They say he's going to come back, this week, and Dak gets hurt, kind of non-contact hamstring injury. Strange. You don't really see that unless a guy's making a move. When Dak was just throwing the ball, it's like, it seems kind of strange, for someone that it's like you've been throwing the ball for however many years, and then you just pull your hamstring off of a throw. It's strange. But Cooper Rush comes in, and Cooper Rush essentially looks pretty maybe a little less completion percentage, but looks the same as Dak. But I don't know what to say about the fake punt either. Brian Anger, that was crazy, or whatever else. Could have hit the guy and he could have had a first down, but was just a bad throw. Kirk Cousins, very mediocre day, even though they're like, oh, high completion percentage. It's like 222 yards with 3 TDs. It doesn't really scream like dominance against a defense that has just been struggling, and you've got a lot of weapons. Bijan and Algier having, some good carries, but not a lot there. I just wonder if this Atlanta offense ever clicks, to be honest with you, to where we can see, where the defense doesn't let up a bunch of points. Because like the only crazy game that you could say for Kirk was against the Buccaneers, but they just let him pass for free all over themselves in their first meeting, early in the season. So who knows about the Atlanta. Titans, New England. I feel really sorry for New England in this game. Mason Rudolph did throw a pick, but like he didn't cost his team the game with his pick like Will Levis had been doing, for the Titans this year. I think if you look at the Titans, they're a few picks away from having, a couple more, 2, maybe 3 more wins, than losses, which would put them in the win column. But it's interesting to me that, you get rid of DeAndre Hopkins to the Chiefs, and then, Ridley shows up. He shows up and he starts to be that kind of number 1 guy. Almost like they weren't willing to put him in, the position to succeed as much, but now he is the guy, which, you ask, coaches, and maybe that's what it came down to, is that Ridley, was more in the long-term plans. They could get something for D-Hop, and they can, start to see what they have with Ridley, to maybe extend him or keep him long-term. But yeah, Drake May, to me, playing really well. He's getting hit a lot. He needs to protect himself. That's what I'll say. It's crazy the amount of yards he rushed for. He's definitely got that athleticism. He's got good speed, and he's quick to run, and get to his top speed, which isn't anything like crazy, but it's, good to where teams can't just ignore that. To have a guy like him rush for almost 100 yards off of 8 carries. But yeah, overall, this kind of came down to Tennessee having the ball, last in overtime, obviously, and them not executing. So good win by Tennessee, but kind of just off and on, for both teams in this game that was supposed to be kind of lackluster, but it ended up kind of being a battle of like, oh, who can out finesse the other. Cardinals Bears. Now, I predicted Bears because I honestly thought like, oh, the Cardinals, they've been scrappy type of thing, and whatever else. And it's like, but I was saying on how I think the Cardinals could give them a run for their money. I didn't think that the Cardinals would just manhandle the Bears and be like, yeah, you're just not winning this game. And we're going to raise questions about your team. Caleb throws for over 200 yards, but he's nearly 50% of passing, gets sacked 6 times. So it's like the return of the sacks for the Bears, where, sorry, it's the return of Caleb's getting pressured and he's getting sacked. And the good thing, I guess, the only good thing I can say is that when he was getting sacked before, he was almost guaranteed to just throw one up and get a pick. And the Cardinals have, guys like Budda Baker and other guys in their secondary that are just gonna, they're gonna feast on that kind of like panicked reaction from a QB. And he didn't do that, but it's like, maybe he just didn't want to force anything. I didn't really see too much of this game, but it's like, overall, you can't score touchdowns. You can't run the ball. You're getting gouged on the run. Some random dude, Demercado, I'm like, who is this guy when I see the highlight? And I'm like, okay, the Bears are just getting gouged on the run, which is crazy, but I will say this, the Cardinals have, a very strong run game that's pretty good. James Conner's an underrated back still, and, some of these other guys, that don't get much playing time, like Trey Benson, but it's like they have weapons. And I mean, it was just another chapter in the Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Junior sweepstakes, where they're continuing to develop and gel, but the Bears, not that they were devoid of offense, but just no points, and their defense did play well. They forced fumbles and turnovers on the Cardinals, and it's like to lose by 20, that's just an offensive failure. And I can't say that I'm too surprised, because like the guy that they have at OC was the OC for the Seahawks last year, and the Seahawks were inconsistent as hell. And you could argue that they have just as much, if not more talent than, the Bears. I would say Caleb probably, in the long run is going to be better than Geno, should he not, go through the head coach carousel type of thing. Which it looks like it's maybe more than likely, especially if they start off the way they did, and then they finish the season disgracefully, where they're getting smacked around by teams that are even outside their division. That many didn't think the Cardinals were a threat to the Bears. But, only time will tell with the Bears, and gosh, it only gets harder with their schedule. Moving on, we have Eagles, Jacksonville. The Eagles, everyone's talking about the Saquon play. I'm like, that's really just like poor defense, as far as I'm concerned, on the Jaguars, who have just had the poorest defense this year. And it's like their offense has had flashes of greatness. Obviously, against my Packers last week, week or 2 weeks ago, they, showed a good amount after, the Packers sustained a couple of injuries. But the thing that I'll say is that, for Philadelphia having such a stout defense and that sort of thing, they were letting T-Law pass all over them at the end of the game. You're up 22-0. And, everyone knows in today's league that it's like 3 touchdowns sometimes isn't enough unless you're under 8 minutes or something crazy where it's like, oh, this would take some crazy miracle or whatever. But it's like they let Jacksonville back in it, and it's like in the final 2 quarters or it's like you're unable to really put up points. And Jalen Hurts, plays an all right game. Saquon Barkley, like I've been saying, carried them. Devontae Smith is good. Barkley's good. AJ Brown didn't do much, but I just get the feeling that it's like the way they're running their pass offense is gonna hold them back against better teams. And that Saquon's not gonna be able to carry them through the postseason to take them where they want to go. So it's like, I think, Philadelphia, for being a 6-2 team, it's interesting, to say the least, that they don't look like a crazy dominant team for a team that's only lost 2 games. Moving on to Lions, Packers, my Packers, beating themselves up again. They essentially hold the Lions, the number 1 offense, who I think they said had been averaging 40 points a game over their last 3, to 17 points. I really thought that the offense would have obviously performed better. Obviously, with the rain, it was nuts to me. It's like the Lions were like, oh, we finally get to play outside. We're not going to let that be, ruined that we're playing a division opponent. They looked like the home team again, which it sickens me, but they've looked more like the home team in the Packers' own home than the Packers have the last, few years. And it's ridiculous. Like, the Packers, sure, we could maybe, later in the year, when we play them again in 4 weeks or whatever it is, 4 or 5 weeks, and it's like, if we go into, Ford and we slap them up, then yeah, it could be the same narrative that hey, this is a team that was not performing, was shooting themselves in the foot, and what for? We kept Jared Goff to under 150 yards, and last week he had 83 or something, when their special teams essentially erupted in their run game. But we were missing Evan Williams and Jair Alexander. You can't tell me that with the way that we played that, maybe that swings the game in our favor, but too many mistakes. By my Packers, including drop passes, some dumb penalties, and just shooting ourselves in the foot, like I said. The yards, if you look at it in this game, is we had way more. We had twice, and maybe not twice the yards of the Lions, but it's I don't think they had 300 total yards, and we had 400 or something. But crazy, it makes you wonder, And it's you can say Love sucks. Oh, he threw a really terrible pick 6, when it's oh, this is when you try to, draw a lead or you try to get points before the half for when you come out after the half. But I, I'll say this as a Packers fan. I think the bye came at just the right time because they need a mental reset. Everybody does. On the maybe not everybody, but like there's certain players that I think they just need to knock it out of their system and need to like not think about football and, you know, to correct these mistakes. You know, Jordan Love especially, I think the picks have got to end if you're going to beat serious teams. And that's, you know, that's clearly what, you know, the Detroit was. And granted, I mean, you could say that, oh, they were lucky, you know, they didn't have to play a full-strength Packers. Oh, Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't catch that if it's Jaire, because Jaire's going to, you know, he's going to hound him throughout the whole catch or whatever, and Keyshawn Nixon doesn't get his head around, which I don't get. He's been playing so well this year, and he's been underrated, you know, and recovered nicely in this new Jeff Hafley defense, but you know, overall just too much shooting in the foot, to be honest with you, to win a game. It needs to be clean, you know, and it's like, even if it is clean, even with the pick, I feel like the Packers can win this game, because only losing by 10, missing, you know, a field goal at one point by, you know, McManus, so it's like it could have been a 7-point game, which would have been wild. But yeah, props to the Lions. They really were able to kind of, you know, make sure that they didn't give up the goose in this game. Rams Seahawks. This is nuts to me, because I thought the Rams, you know, with the way that they won last week, or I mean against Minnesota, where they're like, we're full strength in terms of weapons again, we're going to ball out. But Puka gets ejected. He gets ejected. And I'm like, what? He seemed like such a calm demeanor type of guy. And then he just throws a punch. You know that McVay's going to, you know, have a serious talk to him about that. Like, hey, you can't do that. Like, you cost us a game that we could, you know, not easily win, but maybe they can with Puka. But, you know, Stafford throws for almost 300 yards. Kyron Williams, you know, not a crazy amount of yards, but they were running it with him, keeping as much of a balance as they could with, you know, 44 pass attempts. Geno Smith did lose the Seahawks this game. This game doesn't go into overtime if he doesn't throw that pick six for a 103-yard return, and then also throw another one that was in the red zone, and then another one where it's like, you know, the way that you were moving the ball this game, you know, your offense finally come into fruition, you know, and you threw for 363 yards. I don't understand it. You did throw the game away, literally. And Jackson Smith-Njigba, crazy how he has a breakout game, but you lose, you know, and he was gouging the Rams. They had no answer for him, but props to the Rams. This is why you never quit. This is why you never quit type of game. And props to them for, you know, beating Seattle and pulling ahead in the division with less losses. Now we have Vikings-Colts Sunday night. God, was this game bad. I don't know what it was. Flacco, you know, it was interesting when they said to me that, oh, because he got the start, he was more confident, which I think made him like overly confident and overly aggressive. Some of the footballs he threw should have been picked. And at this point, you know, it's already talking that, like, why did they bench Richardson? You know, Flacco might have had more completions, but it's like Richardson has at least the big play potential, you know, with his legs or his arm. And it's like I was saying, I thought that, you know, the ones he did complete were good passes, and it's not like they were easy, and he puts a beautiful ball up. He's developmental, and it's like, you can't tell me that Flacco, you know, you put Flacco in if you thought that you had a roster that, like, oh, and Richardson was your roster that was ready to compete with any team, and you're going for a playoff spot. And obviously the Colts, you know, they going into this game, they were looking at for a playoff spot and a win against a Vikings team that have lost, you know, their last two games and didn't look great. And The Vikings didn't really look that good until after the half. Obviously, none scored in the first half. Darnold was, doing well, but, excuse me, they couldn't put points on the board, and penalties and sacks were getting them. Like, the Colts defense, did pretty well. And it's like their offense just didn't really play to their strengths. Like, they didn't run the ball well. And, the passing wasn't terrible, but Flacco was just, they weren't getting the first downs when they were easy sometimes. Some of these dump off passes, it's like, oh, you look at, Jonathan Taylor, who's, maybe Flacco's got a problem with Jonathan Taylor, which, would be a huge problem, but it's like, give it to him. Give him the ball. But yeah, I think this game more so, you look at it and it's like, the Vikings didn't win this game. The Colts just were bad, and Flacco was bad. Like, and to still only lose by 8, but it's like, what was this game is what I was thinking to myself. And moving to Monday night, we have Chiefs hosting the Buccaneers. A lot of people were like, oh yeah, this is going to be too tough for, a Bucs team that doesn't have Evans or Godwin, but it's like Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer, Bucky Irving, Rashad White, Cade Otton, they proved that they're a sufficient offense. I really liked what I saw from Shepard. I feel like I've never seen him play a game like this, where he's making the catches and he's being a very reliable target for Baker Mayfield. And Baker played a good game. He almost had a pick early. And then I think after that, he was like, okay, we are going to make sure that we tighten up, our mental, and we are going to play the best game we can play. And he did. I feel like they had a real good shot to kind of pull ahead, going into like the third, and then they just didn't do anything on multiple drives. They end up leading, a game tying drive, and at which point I was curious too I was like, do they go for 2 here and for the win? Just because obviously the Kansas City also had, but it's like, they had enough time, I guess. So I was kind of like, well, if we can't hold them to a field goal regardless, it's not going to matter. But it goes into overtime and the Chiefs win the toss and they just march down the field. It was not that much of a contest for Patrick Mahomes to, do what he wanted in overtime, for the game-winning drive, essentially. And it's like, that's what he does. And Mahomes had a kind of quiet, good game. Obviously, it's like he was throwing it downfield, but there was some of the time, too, that, like, Xavier Worthy screwed up on a catch. And, Pat just really just like cooked all over. And I mean, it's not like he wasn't getting pressured and he got sacked 4 times, but just really resilient and really good win for the Chiefs. The thing that I will say that I think, I noticed is that the Chiefs defense looked like they were tired. It is hard to keep winning games by your defense alone in today's league. And their defense definitely did, do a really good job of almost closing out the game against Baker. They had some crazy stuff go their way. But overall, crazy game. And I think the Buccaneers are the best team that's beneath 500 in all honesty. And it's like they're obviously a very well coached team, and I think that their defense did well enough, and I think that's like the recipe for beating Mahomes is to really get sacks on him. Because if you give him any sort of time and you're not like hounding him to the sound line on a chase out or anything like that, if he's got any sort of, time or relaxation time where he's not under any threat, he's just going to make something happen. And I know we're all sick of it if we're not Chiefs fans, to be honest with you, but it's just the reality of like how he plays. Excuse me. But that's kind of it for like my weekly reactions, a very good set of games this weekend, and hopefully some fun things happen for your team. I hope your team's not sellers, you guys, at the trade deadline today. I'm pretty sure it actually just ended moments ago, but I hope your team didn't sell and that you guys are still in a position to really, flourish after the unofficial midway point of the season. But as always, I'm your host, Cass, and this is Cast. And as always, go Pack Go.